did not do that. He was French. But Ted Cruz and many Americans are now bent on taking zero Syrian refugees anyway on the premise that they are being infiltrated by ISIS. And the House voted yesterday with broad bipartisan support to limit the visa waiver program, which allows people from friendly countries to enter the U.S. without a visa for 30 days. People will now need a visa if they have traveled to Iraq or Syria in the last 5 years. President Obama will sign that bill.
And we constantly examine our strategy to determine when additional steps are needed to get the job done. That's why I've ordered the Departments of State and Homeland Security to review the visa waiver program under which the female terrorist in San Bernardino originally came to this country.
Now, a footnote, in the president's speech on Sunday, in that clip that we just played, he actually misidentified the immigration law under which the apparent female San Bernardino shooter got into the country. She got in on a fiancé visa, but the president identified it as the visa waiver program in that clip. Somehow her incorrect immigration method got into that speech and no one caught it. Small deal, but worth a correction. With me now is Stephen Choi, Executive Director of the New York Immigration Coalition, a pro-immigrant policy and advocacy group. Stephen, welcome back to WNYC.
Thank you for having me here.
First, on the president's error, I know you're a lawyer. Can you just clarify for our listeners the difference between the fiancé visa and the visa waiver program?
Sure, there's a very significant difference. The visa waiver program is essentially a large program that involves a lot of countries, and it basically allows folks to come in without a visa for a period of time. The fiancé visa is something very different and allows Americans to petition for a fiancé that's abroad and be able to bring them over. I think the thing that I would note is that the fiancé visa program is not just simply a program that just you go up to the USCIS and say, hey, I would like to marry this person, and then you get a visa for life. That's not how it happens. And so I think that there's a lot of debate around both the visa waiver program and the fiancé visa that are completely misguided and don't understand the true reality of the immigration system.
What's the vetting process like for a fiancé visa compared to getting admitted as a refugee?
Well, the fiancé visa, I would say both of those are incredibly intensive and a process that have a lot of scrutiny involved. For example, for the fiancé visa, if you want to get that, there's a whole gauntlet of requirements and scrutiny that you have to go through. You got to prove that you and your fiancé are legally free to marry, that you've met in the last couple of years personally, and then there's a whole counterterrorism check conducted by the federal government where they will actually review, they'll run your fingerprints, they'll use facial recognition software, they'll check all that against counterterrorism and law enforcement databases, and there's an intensive interview abroad in your home country where forms and documents are reviewed, real hard questions are asked, they want to make sure it's not a sham marriage. If you pass all that, then you get a 90-day visa, you've got to marry that person within 90 days, and then if you do that, then you've got to apply again to have that person adjust their status. It's an intensive process.
But in this case, there seemed to be a slip-up, or it may turn out that this woman did actually come in intending to lead an attack against the United States from the start. They're actively exploring that possibility.
That's possible. And the thing that I would say is that in the last 15 years, the United States has issued more than 512,000 K-1 fiancé visas. This is the first potential terrorist act ever that's been committed by somebody with a K-1 visa. To say that you're going to completely overhaul the system is like trying to use an atomic bomb to kill an ant.
Has anybody proposed overhauling the fiancé visa system because of this one incident?
People have started to talk about the fiancé visa system. I think when people actually dig into the details, they'll see that it doesn't make a lot of sense to overhaul a system that actually puts a lot of scrutiny on. And I think that you're seeing that as people start to dig into the details of changing up the visa waiver program and also changing up the program and the system for Syrian refugees as well, once they start to realize how much scrutiny is actually baked into the program at the outset.
Obviously, you're condemning Trump. Do you have any problem with this visa waiver program revision that has broad bipartisan support, including the president's?
I do. I think Congress is about to pass some major restrictions, I think more for political reasons rather than policy reasons, but I think they're wrong. And here's why. One problem is that it bans a lot of people who have never set foot in Iraq or Syria or any of these countries. The fact of the matter is that...
I thought you had to have visited Iraq or Syria in the last 5 years in order to not be cleared for a visa waiver. Is that correct?
So that's part of it. Another part of it is it actually bans Iraqi and Syrian nationals who are then coming through another country like France or Germany. The problem is that many of these countries like Iraq or Syria automatically grant citizenship to the children of people who are Iraqi or Syrian fathers. And so you may have a child born in France to a Syrian refugee father who, the Syrian refugee father may have fled Syria and never intends to return. The child may have never set foot in Syria, and yet because they are technically a Syrian national, they're not going to be allowed to travel. There's a whole bunch of people who have gone to Iraq or Syria for humanitarian reasons. We're going to ban those Good Samaritans. I think that the bigger problem is that immigration and the visa waiver program is a prime example of this. It's a two-way street that's paved with trust. And so, when you start to restrict one piece of that, then, it starts to go the other way as well. If the United States says we're going to take France and Germany and we're going to take certain visitors from France and Germany out of the visa waiver program, France and Germany will probably respond. And think about that impact. Think about the impact if American business executives, tourists, and travelers all of a sudden have to apply for visas from France or Germany. That trust breaks down.
What if the U.S. said it was going to take Belgium out of the visa waiver program because so many of the attackers in Paris were in Belgium and were able to cross that border without a visa?
Again, the taking Belgium out is a two-way street, and I think, does that mean we're going to jeopardize our relationship with Belgium as a result? I think the thing to note is that there are a lot of data security provisions that are actually baked into the visa waiver program. People are checked across a whole bunch of counterterrorism databases. If we are going to unilaterally say that we are going to alter the visa waiver program, it really calls into question the basic foundation of trust that underlies it. I think the biggest problem is that, other than just simply bad drafting of knee-jerk legislation, is that there's an impossibly high bar that people are trying to set up, where we're trying to say, we need to guarantee that no people who are coming to this country will ever potentially harm the United States. That's an impossibly high bar to me.
And you think that's an analogy to the Donald Trump bar all Muslims proposal, even though it'll never happen? Like you were talking about the K2 visa, the fiance visa, there have been, hundreds of thousands of those granted in recent years, and we have this one woman who may have used it as a means to get in to attack Americans, that very few Muslims, only a handful, if you even include the 9/11 attackers going back that far, have used immigration in that way, therefore closing off the borders to all Muslim immigrants or tourists is, what was your analogy before, like using an atomic bomb to kill an ant?
I think that the thing to note is that the numbers are really stark. The United States has successfully resettled 784,000 refugees. 3 of them have been arrested for terrorism-related violations. I gave you the numbers about the fiancé waiver program before. I think the thing to note is that, again, we are never going to achieve the kind of absolute security that some people want to have. The main sponsor of the visa waiver bill, Candace Miller from Michigan, said something to the effect of, we want to make sure that if before we grant special access to our soil, we have all the information that we need to make sure that someone is not a threat. Guess what? We will never have all that information. And so to think about the collateral damage and the consequences that will happen if you try to essentially stop these programs in their tracks because you want that level of security, that's going to have untold damage, not only for refugee populations and fiancés, but also for us as a country.
By the way, I think I just mistakenly called the fiancé visa a K2 visa. K2 is something else. This is the K1 visa. Listeners, let's keep doing what we started yesterday. If you were a Trump supporter before this proposal, seriously, if you were, are you still one today? 212-433-WNYC. Or is this a deal breaker? Tell us if it is or if it isn't. If you were a Trump supporter 2 days ago, 212-433-WNYC, 433-9692. And we can take other callers too for Stephen Choi, Executive Director of the New York Immigration Coalition, a pro-immigrant policy and advocacy organization. Before I get off the visa waiver program, you are an immigrant coalition, Immigration Coalition. Are the people you represent affected by the visa waiver program change? Because that's not for immigrants at all, right? As opposed to people coming as tourists or on business or something for very short stays.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't affect a lot of people who are looking to make the United States their permanent residence and their permanent home. But I do want to note that, again, the visa waiver program is much like the rest of the immigration system. It's really built on trust. And if you don't have that trust for the visa waiver program, what we're seeing is that people are not stopping and saying, we're going to change the visa waiver program. They're also saying we need to change this and that, the refugee resettlement program. And I think that this debate is very closely linked to the debate around immigration. And I think when you see Donald Trump and people of his ilk, they really merge all that stuff together.
And is it such a burden for people from the European nations or wherever to get a visa to come to the United States? One version I heard of it on NPR this morning said all they have to do is be interviewed by an American official. There's not going to be some big background check that's going to take some kind of delay. I've traveled abroad and needed to get a visa to go to one country or another. I'm sure you have. It's not a big deal.
It's not a huge deal, but I think it is a considerable one when you think about the volume of folks who are going back and forth. Again, back and forth from the United States and to these countries. It's not a one-way street. So to require all of them to be able to go through this process, I think really undermines what the whole visa waiver program is really meant to be. It's meant to grease the skids of international travel with countries that we have developed trust with. And I think once that trust breaks down, then it can really go in a whole lot of different ways, none of which I think we want to go down.
Phil in Queens, you're on WNYC. Hi, Phil.
Hi. So, I'm sort of a Trump Cruz supporter, and I think Trump has a problem in that he, like a lot of New Yorkers from Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx, they give little snippets of bigger ideas, and of course the media is holding him to this. But I think if we look at history, when there's been a security challenge, the leadership responds. Progressive President Wilson interred, investigated, deported, and stopped Germans and Italians, thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands of them, when World War I broke out. FDR did the same for Germans and Italians, and also for Japanese. Obviously, there isn't time to go into that, and we all agree that the internment of the Japanese was wrong.
Phil, first on the media making too big a thing out of what Trump said, isn't it different if he says something off the cuff and then everybody focuses on those 4 words and maybe takes them out of context, compared to this, which was an official policy proposal that he released in a press release and then told the whole media that he was going to give a speech on the topic, which was carried on multiple cable channels, and that this is actually to bar anybody from coming to this country if they're Muslim as a tourist or, on visa waiver or anything else. I mean, that's a big, big deal, isn't it?
And I think what's happened, and I bet Trump's numbers are going to go up.
Could be.
When 9/11 happened, we landed all planes. The fact that you could have an employee with a good job in California go in with his recent wife, obviously pre-radicalized, and slaughter people. And this is a guy, by the way, who, for his job, among other things, visited school cafeterias, a place where he and his wife could have shown up and killed hundreds of children. We have to say land all planes.
Phil, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much. Let's take another one. Isaac in New Brunswick. Isaac, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Hi, how are you, Brian?
Okay, thank you.
My feeling is that anti-Semitism is basically universal in the Islamic world, and the poll numbers that question their opinions when they're here in the United States, Islamic communities, doesn't seem to be much better. In fact,
But wait, are you going to... First of all, it's not a fair statement to make that anti-Semitism is universal in the Muslim world, which is over 1 billion people. You're casting so many individuals with a broad brush, even if it is widespread. I mean, isn't conservatism in the United States based on the principle of evaluating every individual on their merits rather than on the basis of group?